Welcome everybody to our Friday conversation, which we've been doing this over the last several weeks. It's just a way for our team to either Ben and myself or even some other people that we're connected to, having them join us on a conversation just about what's happening in college ministry, young adult ministry. If we haven't met, my name is Andy Abramson, and my co-host, co-man, co-dude, Ben Pontius. So
I'll go with co-dude.
The co-dude, yeah. So excited to be here today. We are with Eric Morrow. And so Eric, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit and kind of let us know about your context, who you are, what's going on in ministry for you right now?
Yeah, absolutely, Andy. So been married to my wife, Melanie, for 15 years. I got two kids, Charlie, who's 4, and my daughter, Paya, who is 8, and who is a social being. Can't wait for COVID to be over. That's our life right now. I've been in ministry for 5 years. My first 2 years in ministry, I worked with Fellowship of Christian Athletes in Minnesota. And then now for the last 3 years in my current spot, I work at Hope Church in Grand Forks, North Dakota. We're excited in Grand Forks. We finally got indoor plumbing about a year ago. So I'm kidding. That's what everybody on there thinks is going on in North Dakota.
They're still waiting for electricity, but
It's hand crank.
Yeah, exactly. But anyways, yeah, Grand Forks, for those that don't know, University of North Dakota is here, one of the 2 major universities in the state. It's a campus of about 11,000 people, and then a couple more thousand online. So it's like a 14,000 student school. We've got a community college in our town as well. And at Hope, I'm the director of college and career ministries, which means that I basically oversee young adults from the 18 to 30-year-old range. So yes, we deal with college, but we also deal with young adults, the young professionals in town as well. And so, a couple unique things there in that we are a college ministry, but we're also part of a church. So there's that sort of unique blend of that. And then also that we're not just campus or college, that we're doing, again, with young professionals in town as well. And so this is my 3rd year here. And so it's...
How long have you been connected with Elementum? Has it been over a year now?
Yeah, I think I started last summer, somewhere around this time. So it's basically been about a year. And cool. It's been great. Love you guys and love how you help me. And it's great having people that do young adult ministry and are what I like to think is experts or have experience that I can turn to and talk to and spitball stuff off of. And I've really enjoyed the experience.
Yeah, it's been super fun to get to know you. So that's good. Okay, so here's the conversation. Ben, why don't you set us up maybe a little bit, tell us what the conversation is today, and then maybe a little bit some of the why behind it.
Yeah. So, one of the reasons we wanted to have you on, Eric, I know in the last year, as we've been working together, one of the intentional shifts you've been wanting to make was moving away from a more like event-centric program kind of driven ministry to something that's more discipleship and community based, which is a conversation that we have pretty consistently with ministries. I know. And so I think it's a worthwhile conversation right now, especially with COVID-19 stuff going on. Like before we went live, right, we're having the conversation about churches struggling, thinking about what larger churches saying, when do we restart doing our normal core event, the Sunday morning service in person? I think we would all agree it's nowhere near the same to be doing it online or from home with your family. It's good, but it's not the same. So I think this is I think there are a lot of people out there asking questions about, okay, how do we continue doing the ministry that we've been doing if the future kind of continues as it has been for the next month or two? So I think it's a really important thing. So let's start with this question. What would you guys say, in your experience, your observation, what's the difference between a ministry that's like program event focused and a ministry that's more discipleship focused? Now, I'll qualify that, right? We're not saying that those are 2 totally separate things. You can have a ministry that is very programmatic, but also does great discipleship. But what would you say? What are some of the differences between those 2 emphases?
Yeah, I think kind of the big thing for me on it, the way that I like to think about it, is like you said, just because we're discipleship focused, it doesn't mean that we don't have any large events or we don't do any sort of program things. But what's different is I think it's what do you emphasize So the emphasis for us has gone away from the large events or the programs, and the emphasis now is on our life groups. That sort of smaller discipleship type group is what we focus on now instead. Yeah. And, for me, I'm just one of those people that believes discipleship happens within relationship. And within large events or within programs, that's really hard. Let me go back a little bit because I think this might help the conversation on how we got to the switch. Mm-hmm. When I started here, the first couple of years, again, we were more programmatic and we saw numbers grow, right? Like we saw more people coming. Mm-hmm. And so there was momentum that way. But what all I saw happening was growth in numbers. I didn't see growth in spiritual development in people. Yeah. And the other thing along with that I saw was that I didn't see relationships forming. And so like it just gnawed at me. I was like, how can we switch that? Because man, I want to see people growing in their faith. Mm-hmm. I want to see people growing in relationship. Like, again, I think that's discipleship. You look at Jesus and you look at the disciples, and we talk about that all the time in our group, is like, we want to see people disciple people who disciple who disciple. Yeah. It's sort of that multiplier effect is what we want to see happen. And I think, again, for that to happen, one, you've got to grow spiritually, and two, you've got to grow relationally. That's what we saw with Jesus and the disciples. And so that's what we thought. That's kind of how we made the switch. And so that's our real focus now is, I guess the difference is we focus on our life groups. We focus on what are you doing to grow with Jesus? What are you doing to grow with the other Christian people in your life? And then what are you doing to reach out to the people around you in your life, your classmates, your fellow coworkers, whoever it may be that need Jesus. And that's really what our emphasis is. So,
Andy, I'd be curious to hear, because I know, so you guys are at Home Church is at the Austin Stone, which is a huge church, does excellent job at their programs, and they definitely have some very large, significant events, but they're also very discipleship focused. So what have you seen at the Stone that, like, how are they integrating those two together?
Well, here's what I would say is it's the question. The integration is really about the question of what is the hope of a program or a gathering point? Is it just significantly for that gathering point, right? So you want to come to an event or come to a worship night or whatever, or is that an entry point for relationships, right? Is that an entry point for you to step in closer to a relationship with somebody, or to get involved for us in a missional community, or, a DNA group or something like that? And for us at our church, even though it's big, even though there's some great even environments that are like attractive, the goal, that's not the end point for people, right? That's just kind of a passing through point into relationships and other opportunities that you can jump into. And so even you mentioned that, Eric, and that's what I think about even this, the kind of the tension between programmatic and discipleship is what's the end? What's the end goal? Is the end goal for somebody to sit and observe something, or is the end goal for them ultimately to get into a relationship?
So, because I think, I'm hearing what you guys are saying. I totally agree. And I think most people would probably agree with that statement, but yet it's so easy to default to, okay, we got this event, and then it becomes about, let's keep this event running. Let's make sure we have more people showing up to this thing. Why is that?
I honestly believe it's because programmatic event ministry is easier. I really think I think there's two reasons. It's easier. And I think the second reason is, whether we want to admit it or not, we love being able to give people a number. And people love being able to hear a number, right? I work in the church, and, and God bless everybody who says it to me, but they always ask me, hey, how are things going? And what is the first thing they ask me? How many people showed up? Yeah. Right? That's their first question to prove whether or not it was a good event or was a good program for the night. And please, I'm not saying numbers don't matter, right? Because if there's people there and we can share the gospel with people, that is amazing and that is important. But again, like, that's what I saw happening. I saw our group growing, right, when I first started. And then I'd say, hey guys, we talked about, hey, let's get in the word and do this. Did you do that this week? Nah. Hey, we
Yep.
talked about let's pray and do this. Did you do that this week? No. I mean, we saw that happening again and again and again. And so it's just that idea of that you've got to be able to go beyond that. And, when you want to disciple, that's relational ministry, and that's messy, right? Because it means we got to let people into our lives. It means we got to be there for people when it's more convenient for us to sleep or just chill on our couch or whatever it may be. And so it's harder. I mean, one of our groups, right? One of our leaders, she's amazing. And her group has just rocked it out during COVID, right? I mean, haven't even been phased in terms of like
awesome.
what they've been doing. Yeah, it's been amazing. But I asked her, like, why do you think it's worked? Like, what do you think has worked? And you know what? She said, every single day, like, I just shoot a text to our group. I've been doing it for months now, even before COVID started, right? I just said, I would send a verse out to people. I would say, hey, how you doing? Hey, how can we pray for you? And it was like, it took months. But after months, like, people actually realized, like, you know what? This girl cares about me. This girl's my friend, that sort of thing. But that's not easy, right?
Yeah.
I mean, by her own admission, that's not easy. And it's way easier just to go, you know what? We're going to have a Bible study once a week. It's at 7:00. You show up. I saw you for an hour.
Yeah.
I'll
text you the night before to make sure you show up.
Yeah. See you next week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
well, and you even think like how, and you touched on this, Eric, just how much easier it is. It's a lot of work. If you're going to have a disciple making relational style ministry, to really get the pulse on what's happening takes way more work.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's really about like finding out stories of transformation, of like, okay, who's meeting, who's not meeting, are they engaging, are they pursuing? It's a whole lot easier just to count the numbers of people that come into a building than it is to have to like almost rustle cats that are all over the place trying to figure out, what's happening. So even I think about how much easier it is on just a logistical level to move towards kind of programmatic, kind of bend.
Yeah, definitely far easier to measure the like default results versus having to do that digging.
Yeah. So here's what I'd love to know, Eric, as you think about even some of these stories of disciple making, what would be some kind of effective disciple making stories that you've seen over this year? And I would love to hear you, Ben, because you've been at this almost 10 years now, right? In a more micro church missional community model. So this is kind of the thrust of what you do. So I'd love to hear just what are a couple stories of what this looks like on a practical level.
Yeah. And this was, so before, this actually didn't happen this year, but this is a great example of a group that was kind of living this out before we switched to it. But I want to share it where it was 4 girls. 3 of them were in a life group or a small group, and one of their roommate and the 4th roommate, not a believer, right? And when she came in, she was like, guys, I don't want you to talk to me about Jesus. I don't want you to, like, leave me alone. I'm not interested in the religion stuff, that sort of end of thing. And you know what? Like, those 3 girls just loved on her, like never shoved anything down her throat, just said, hey, like, do you want to come to church with us? Lots of times she would just say no. Hey, we're going out to do this. Do you want, I mean, just all the time. And pretty soon she had some things happen in her life. And she said, yeah, I'll come. And they were always open to talking about the Bible with her. They would dig into it with her. And after a year of that, she finally gave her life to Christ. And it's just continued into this year where she's continued to grow in her faith. And again, it's not easy, but it's those people living together in the same house, being available.
Yeah, that's good.
Just doing that. Like, I know one of her friends who was one of our leaders would just like say, hey, let's just study the Bible today. Like, was always studying the Bible with her, like using her free time to do that with her because she had all these questions. And so I think that's a great example that we've seen from our group.
That's good.
And I got other ones as well, but I mean, that's the one that sticks out the most to me, where you've seen someone go from a non-believer to a believer to continue to grow. And it's just because people have just invited them into her life and done it with her. So,
yeah, I think one of the assumptions maybe in the programmatic model, if you're saying, hey, we need to get people to this event, in order for them to experience God or to learn about faith or whatever. There's like maybe a couple assumptions really. I mean, one of the assumptions is that the person who's the preacher, teacher, the professional, whether they're literally professional in the sense that it's their profession or whether they're someone who's volunteered to take the lead, like that person is the one who is doing the ministry. And that there's that there comes this moment of like, I've heard the right thing. Now I will put my faith in Jesus. When in my experience, there's times where that's people's experience where they encounter God in a significant way and they make the jump from here to here. But I think the stories that I've been a part of, people I've seen come to faith or that have in the ministries that I've been a part of, it's usually stories more along those lines where they got to know people and they felt like it was a safe place for them to question and push and struggle with the things that they're struggling with. And over time, like, it's almost like there's this point where they said, you kind of realize, I think I actually believe what you guys believe now. There wasn't necessarily a moment where we had an altar call or something like that. So I think that relational invitation to people to welcome them in, and even creating spaces. I was talking with the guy who leads a network of micro churches. They have like 14 churches out in the East Coast. And we were talking on Wednesday morning about one of the things they realized is that they were doing evangelism kind of stuff. They call it their party or serve space, where they'll go out and serve at a local nonprofit or, do some work in the community, or they'll have just a party, invite neighbors over for dinner or have a grill out in the park or whatever. So they would have those spaces, which are really like neutral spaces. If spiritual conversation happens, it happens because it just kind of happens. There's not necessarily any forcefulness there. Then they had their like church gatherings where they were studying scripture, worship, prayer, equipping believers for living out their faith. And they realized, like, we need a space that's kind of in between that, where we're saying this is a second space where people can be invited into. They know it's going to be some sort of spiritual discussion, but it's not a Bible study. It's not, this guy's going to teach you about Christianity. It's like, hey, let's talk about faith. Let's talk about spirituality. What questions do you have about God, or what do you disagree with in scripture? And some of the, and I think that's that conversation that him and I had actually got me thinking about, like, that being a key part of discipleship that is somewhat lacking even in what we're doing here in Fargo, saying, what are ways that we can start integrating that, kind of creating a space that's good, not absent of spirituality, but also not diving right into the deep end and spending an hour discussing, Ephesians chapter 1 or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a great, because I know for a lot of us probably on here, or for some people on here, that's a hard thing to do, because we've for some reason in the Christian world, like, we've decided that unless we're just all Jesus all the time when we get together, like, it doesn't count. And I mean, it does. And like if we have a people over and we're not, like you said, diving into Ephesians 1, like, that doesn't count as discipleship. And I just think, like, when we think that way, we miss the boat. Like, I got a good friend who works for Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and when he was in college, he played football, and he was talking about how he came to Christ after football. And he said one of the things that's still really hard for him with the faith is he's never found that tightness or whatever that he had with his football team. Right. But stop and think about that for a second. Why? Because what did that football team do? They trained together. The guys lived together. They went shopping together. They went eating together. Right. That's what, and we have to understand that same thing exists in the Christian world. Like, when you look at Jesus, him and the disciples ate together. They walked the roads together. They went in the ships together. Like, you know what I mean? They were doing life. Like, I know Jesus was talking about God to them, but I have this hard time believing that was the only thing they discussed. Like when they walked and the wind was blowing, or when they went and saw, like, and were like, man, that looks amazing. Like, we should grab some fruit off that tree, or like, hey, that looks like that would be fun over there. We should stop and look and see what those people are doing. Like, we can do the same thing. And I think, like, we've got to remember that.
Which I think that's one of the key mindset shifts if you want to move from programmatic to disciplement, right? Because I think even in the missional conversation, which is more where we've been for the last several years, like you mentioned, Andy, where we're saying, hey, we want all of life to be about centered around Jesus. I even find this in myself, like the tendency is to operate with the assumption, like if my life is centered around Jesus, then literally all I talk about is Jesus, or somehow it's less valuable if we're not praying or studying scripture or something. But really to shift that key shift of saying the kingdom of God is present, and whatever we're doing by faith, whether it be playing video games or eating a hamburger or talking about, I don't know, politics or whatever, or the weather, that can be done by faith and be something that is like an offer of the kingdom of God to the people around us. And because otherwise a lifestyle of discipleship isn't sustainable. It's not possible for us to operate at this like super spiritual level 24 hours a day. I can't even do that by myself, much less as a
with other people,
with kids, or like with a bunch of 20 somethings in our house.
Yeah. So here's a question I would love, and Eric, this would be really good, because I think there's a lot of people, and Ben, you and I have talked to a lot of leaders over the last several weeks who feel like that they need to make this shift, right? They like, okay, we have been kind of heavy on programs. Now we feel this even call beyond what happens with COVID. Now we feel like we want to make this shift. And so what would you say, if you're talking to some of those leaders, Eric, what would be some, kind of things that they need to consider or think about in terms of making that shift? Like you've made that shift over the last year or two.
Well, I think the first we just got done talking about, you have to shift in your mind, and it's going to be for you. And I've noticed it amongst our people is, what do you consider wins? What do you know what I mean? Like if you've got to shift in your mind that the only thing that makes a win is if someone, had a 2-hour study on Genesis 1, right? Well, you've got to be able to shift that in your mind. I think one thing that can really help, and this is, it's a huge step, but for this, you have to step away from emphasizing the large group. Like you've really got to say and be willing to do that. And I think too, it's to take a long view. That can help as well. Yeah. Like, because if you don't have the long view, you could struggle with it right away. But let me share just 2 examples of things. Like, so we shifted this year. We had 8 groups going. To be honest, some of the groups didn't do that well, right? But we had like half of them 4 that just like did really well this year. And you know what, you guys, like they have, like COVID didn't put any hiccup in their step.
That's
right?
Fun.
Like, I mean, and like, I'll be honest with you, I was worried about that, right? I mean, because I didn't know, I'd never seen it before. Like, that's why you don't know. And I'd call these girls, and they're like, yeah, this is the most people we've ever had joining a group. Wow. And all their people would show up, and they'd all be on the Zoom, and they're all texting each other, and it's just business as normal, right? Because they've built their group around this friendship. They built it around Jesus. They built it around doing life with each other. Mm-hmm. And that didn't change.
Yeah.
And
that's good, because, and I want to kind of stop there before you keep going, because I think, Ben, you and I have talked about this of, a lot of groups, what we've seen is the groups that are doing well in this time, like you're talking about, Eric, some of those people that are doing well, ministries that are doing well, what we see is there's certain principles that they're driven by, right? Making disciples, loving people, community. And now it's just a matter of shifting how you're going to execute on those, right? Yeah. The ministries that are really struggling right now are the ones that are holding on to a form of ministry, and all of a sudden that form is taken away. And so I just kind of wanted to highlight that even some of these groups, the reason that they can shift so quickly is there's this undergirding that they have, that they're discipleship driven, community driven, loving people driven. And so now it's just a matter of like, okay, we'll do it in a new way. We'll try to figure out what that looks like now in the midst of COVID, just like we did 3 months ago or whatever. So.
Yeah. And I think one other thing I just want to share, like, again, it takes time. It's slow, but like, if you can make this shift, to me, the most exciting thing, ever is when people give their lives to Christ. That's the biggest decision anybody can give. And, any group's excited about that. But I remember this actually happened about 2 weeks before everything shut down. But we had a meeting at our house, and that we were about 6 months into doing this. And we would always start meetings with, hey, what are some praises, that are going on? And this is what happened around our room. And this had all happened to these people within like a week or two, within each group that we had. The one girl goes, you know what? She said, I have a classmate who said, man, you seem to really love Jesus, and I'm struggling. Like, will you share so we're sharing verses and Bibles. And this guy started coming to our group, right? Next girl goes, you know what? She said, ran into an international student. None of his friends are here. So you know what? We invite him over to our house, and we're making him a cake to celebrate his birthday. Next girl goes, you know what? I've been hanging out in my dorm room in those big commons areas between. And she goes, and I've been in some conversations I don't want to be a part of, but I've sat in them for the chance to talk to people about Jesus. And now I've got a guy who's coming to church with me. The next person goes, yeah, we went to, the Ash Wednesday service, and our group had kind of been on the fringe, or not on the fringe, but not as deep, but some people opened up, and all these people, we just went deeper with each other, and it's taken our group to another level. Another guy invited a coworker. They brought 2 friends over. I mean, these are all our different groups. And like, man, that's like seeing the gospel lived out, right? Seeing the great commandment, the great commission lived out within like a week or two of all these different groups and all these different leaders, just because we continue to say, like, what are you doing to chase after Jesus? What are you doing to bring people into your lives, to love the people around you? And I mean, like, that was probably in my ministry here, the most impactful meeting I've had, just to see it all come together like that for every group when they're willing to do this. And if that excites anybody here listening, man, it's worth the shift. So
it better excite you or you're in the wrong job. I think that's one thing. I love the excitement that's in your voice as you say in that, Eric, because I think it's more exciting to have other people come to you as a leader, as the pastor, as whatever your job title is, or if you're a volunteer as the kind of point leader, to have people come to you and say, hey, God is doing this through me, and share those stories. And the amazing thing about that is, right, then it can replicate. One of the big challenges that we see so often with so many young adult and college ministries is the transitory nature of the demographic. And, Eric, you're a unique, in the grand picture of churches. Most churches don't have someone on staff who's focused on college ministry. So if they have a ministry, it's a volunteer, it's a retired couple, it's a college student who says, I want to do something. So if it's set up programmatically and that person leaves and it depends on them to run that program, it's probably going to disappear, because most likely other people aren't going to be equipped to run that program or that event. But if it's set up on those principles and you have a group of people who are capturing that heart of, I'm going to live my life in such a way that is welcoming people into discovering more about Jesus, then that can continue. Even if the official ministry at the church stops, those people aren't going to stop doing that, Lord willing.
Yeah. And, one other thing I wanted to add on it, guys, was, if you look at, if we're all honest, we'll admit, like, we look at all the other ministries around us and we see what they're doing, and, oh, that group's got 50 people or 100 people or 200 or whatever the number is, right? But, sometimes we've got to remember that some of those groups that have, like, I've seen it, right? They've got 150 people. They've also got 8 staff members that work with them, right? Yeah. And, like, for me, what I've loved about this is I'm one person, right? And with the way it's set up here, there's never going to, at least in the near future, there's not going to be more paid staff members than me. It's going to be me, one person. Yeah. And what this has done is it's allowed us to reach so many more people, because now we're putting the power, into the hands of our leaders. Yeah. And what's happening with that is we can reach so many more people and make such more of an impact than we can with just one person trying to run some programs, to run some events. You get all these other people involved, and what it does is it makes everyone a participant in your ministry, right? Which we're all called to be. We're called to be, we're not called to be consumers of faith. We're called to be participants in our faith. And that is what this allows us to do. And that's what I'm excited about as well, is just seeing all the people that are participating in their faith with some of them on a daily basis with the people in their lives. So
that's huge. Well, I think we've hit our half-hour mark here. So one final question. This doesn't necessarily have to be tied to the topic, but we're, like we mentioned a couple of times, we're in the midst of a weird season. Yeah. I know we were talking before we went live about the uncertainty that's coming for if you're a college ministry, if you're young adult ministry, if you're a church going into summer and fall. We don't know what that's going to look like. I'd love for each of us to just say what's maybe a word of encouragement or advice that you have for people who are leading college and young adult ministries in this season.
One of you guys go first.
Here's what I would say is it's and this is what we're seeing with a lot of leaders. Ben, you and I have experienced this. Eric, you just talked about this. It's a hard shift, but it's well worth it, right? Mm-hmm. And what it does is it allows us to push the ministry down into the fabric of the people, like the people to participate in the ministry and to be a part of moving the ministry out. And so my encouragement is as you're getting into this season, as you think about fall, and you want to begin to take steps, begin to model this in your life first, right? Begin to kind of pull people in, invest in them, but then charge them and challenge them and invite them to be a part of doing the same thing. And you can see some pretty significant impact no matter what it looks like this fall. Even if it shifts and changes, that like we go back, if you have those principles, that you just figure out how to navigate those depending on what season that you're in.
So I'll give, this is maybe more a couple resources that I've found super helpful, since my focus really is largely in the missional discipleship, all life kind of model. We're about as far, maybe not as far as you can go on that towards away from the programmatic, but couple resources that I've found hugely helpful over the years, that, man, if you as a leader can make space or time to engage with some of these, I'll just do 2 books over the summer, it can be well worth your time. One is The Forgotten Ways by Alan Hirsch. Not necessarily an easy read, but it will blow your mind and radically reshape your thoughts about church, about ministry, about being a follower of Jesus. So The Forgotten Ways by Alan Hirsch. And then Organic, I think it's Organic Church by Neil Cole. Both of those are great reads that will kind of push your thinking outside of the default box if you're operating in a culture that's maybe more event focused or program focused. Both of them are more about church overall, but I think tons of implications for young adult and college ministry, regardless of what the format or context is. So those would be 2 worthwhile reads.
Yeah, I think, again, I'll kind of jump off a little bit of what Andy was saying. We're going to have our first in-person leaders meeting with some of our leaders who are in town on Monday night. And the one thing I want to talk with them about, and we're really just getting together because we haven't been able to be in person to eat. We're going to play some games. Yeah. I mean, it's mostly going to be fun, but the one thing I'm going to talk to them about, start praying about and thinking about, is this idea that, there's a high probability that this year on campuses, you are not going to be able to do what you've done in the past.
Yeah.
To some extent. It might be none of it, or at least some of it. And more than ever, it's going to be dependent upon each person in your group to play a role, to be a participant. Now more than ever. I mean, we've always been called to it, but that's what it's going to be. And so you've got to get people moving in that direction, switching to more of this discipleship-focused missional community life group, whatever you want to call it, is going to allow you to best utilize, because it's going to have to be a lot of one-on-one, 2-on-2 small group interactions. And this puts you in that wheelhouse, to be able to do it. So if you've been thinking about this change, now more than ever is the best time to do it. because if you're going to try to lean on your 100-person gathering, like that might, like they may not allow you to do that. So just challenge you with that. You gave a book out, Ben. I'll give one more thing. I've been reading a book called The Emotionally Healthy Leader by Peter Cesaro. I might have butchered his last name. Amazing book for leaders on just being emotionally healthy and how important that is to your ministry being healthy.
That's crucial. So
many good things in that book. So if you're looking for a summer read, definitely recommend it.
Awesome.
Yay, books.
Yeah, that's good. Well, hey, Eric, thanks for taking time
Absolutely.
on this conversation today. It was really fun to jump in with you. Hey, if you're on Zoom, on Facebook Live, if you're watching the recording of this, man, if you're wrestling with some of this stuff, we'd love to have a conversation with you of like what it looks like to transition or help you continue to transition into a new season. And so if you want to get a hold of us, the best way to do that is go to elementumresources.com/call. And there'll be a calendar link, and you can get on our calendar, and our staff would love to kind of just sit down and talk with you about where you're at, what's going on in your ministry, what the future looks like. And it'd be a great chance to just hear your story, what God is doing. So yeah, thanks again, Eric. Look forward. We'll be back next week. We're on, Lord willing, we're on the schedule. So love for you to continue to join us, and have a great weekend, everybody.
Later.